Viewers, welcome to the Personal Injury Law Show. This is a show that talks about everything current in the law of personal injuries and obviously other issues that are relevant to you, the viewer. My name's Tony Carbone. I'm a personal injury lawyer, 30 years experience. With me tonight I've got Jess Rosler, a senior lawyer in civil law at Nottle, Carbone, Slater and Gordon. Good evening, Jess.
Evening, Tony. Evening, viewers.
And a former lawyer come marketing guru, Vivian Ryan, the absolute doyen of marketing these days.
Well, you flabbergast me with that sort of introduction. Thank you, Tony. Good evening, viewers.
Viewers, tonight we're very fortunate to have Brendan Nottle, the Major from the Salvation Army, talking to us about homelessness and the youth crisis in this state. So please stay tuned for that because it's going to be a riveting episode.
But before that, what's in the news, Tony?
Oh, Viv, there's been so many stories. I find this one an absolutely horrific and I'm flabbergasted. Dr. Andrew Churchard, who was working at the Cabrini Hospital and Monash Medical Centre, there was allegations of sexual abuse by his patients, and probably the most outrageous case of all was a young fellow who was being treated for Tourette's, and both his parents were doctors, and he complained about sexual abuse. And what the authorities do, Viv?
Well, they actually didn't do anything. They rallied behind this doctor and they did everything possible that you would imagine shouldn't happen when there are doctors who are, have allegations against their conduct, particularly in the sexual nature. It is quite disturbing and it's a really, really sad story. Over the years, there are a number of people that came forward and he continued treating these patients. And sadly, earlier this year, he actually took his own life, which, again...
That's when the proverbial hit the fan.
Yeah, yeah.
Just, Jess, don't you think it's outrageous? Now, this fellow that complained about him was a law student.
That's correct.
So you'd think that he's an upstanding citizen, correct?
Yes.
His parents are both doctors. They know how the medical profession works. They make complaints to the authorities. The authorities say, no, he's a doctor, he's a top bloke, he can keep working.
Yeah. Look, there's two aspects that are alarming in this case, particularly, Tony. The first is that if a lawyer or a legal student rather and doctors who are well educated parents can't deal with the complaint system, then where does that leave everyone else?
Within the actual system itself.
Yeah, that's right. And then the second alarming aspect was the response that there was a chaperone, but none of the patients were actually advised as to why there was a chaperone for this doctor.
And even with the chaperone, there are
closed
allegations
that he closed the curtains.
that abuse still continued. So I think there's a lot of transparency that needs to happen as well. I mean, when you go and see a doctor yourself, if there's another person present, you need to be told why they are there.
Yeah.
And then you should have the right to refuse if you're not comfortable. I think transparency is absolutely key.
And you know what's really, really concerning about all of this? Apparently the figures say that there's about 50 to 100 doctors working with chaperones throughout the country.
That's right.
So what are they? Sexual predators? I mean, they need medical treatment, don't they?
Well, I mean, we don't want to assume that all chaperones are consequences.
That's the allegations. So obviously you've got to be investigated.
Yeah, but I think moreover from the public point of view is to really be aware of why there is an independent third party present at your consults
to ask the question.
And if in doubt and if uncomfortable, you reserve the right to refuse.
Well, when the evidence was stacking pretty heavily against this doctor, he took his own life.
Which is incredibly
sad as well, I mean, really.
Again, demonstrates that it wasn't dealt with properly at all, not for the victims, and leaving the victims behind without any recourse now. I mean, do they have recourse as a deceased estate?
Because there's insurance. But, the sad thing about it is if this doctor had got appropriate treatment, he might still have been alive. Him committing suicide's not the answer. Would have been good if his employers would have said, right, you need treatment, buddy.
Yeah.
Let's get you treated. Let's try and fix up this problem.
Yeah.
And that way you're a brilliant doctor, you can keep treating your patients.
Yeah. Clearly he had his own
dying's
issues.
Not the answer.
No,
it's pretty sad.
It's not the answer for anyone.
All right. I find this outrageous.
Do
A
you
15-year-old girl gets a mastectomy. She wants a sex change. Around the world, you cannot give consent until you're 18 years of age.
Yeah.
This is insane.
Well, this is an exclusion in the family court that the decision has been made that a 15-year-old girl who has lived as a boy since the age of 4 has been afforded the right to have a mastectomy, a double mastectomy, because she has E-cup breasts. And the court has found that in this case, the exception applies because it can lead to depression, anxiety, if it isn't dealt with prior to her receiving hormonal drugs. And the problem is that once the drugs are implemented and issued as part of her gender change, then not only will she be facing, hair and all other things that come from the testosterone, which generally they apply before surgery, but in this case, the court has awarded the opportunity for them to have surgery prior to the ingestion of drugs, which I think is very brave, and I'm supporting this one.
Jess, my concern is this. This is not really her decision. This is a court decision. And the fact of the matter is that at 18 years of age, we've all got the authority to make our own decisions. 3 years away, do you think it's a good decision, or it's a first?
I think the decision needs to be looked in the context of these matters. So the
Voice of reason, thanks, Jess.
So effectively, it's not an unusual decision insofar as the age, because the usual practice is to apply to the court for the child to undergo hormonal treatment before a decision is made about surgery.
I guess the concern is that down the track, if the child has a change of heart, it's too late.
I get that.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah.
We'll come back
It's
to
interesting anyway. But obviously there were a lot of supporting evidence for the courts to have awarded such an extreme
Another
right,
sad case, and also outrageous and bizarre, is a mum who apparently knew that the mother was being abused by the father, the daughter was being abused by the father, and the grandson was being abused by the father, sexually abused, mind you, leaves them out of a will. The mother says, don't tell anyone, don't tell the authorities, don't tell anyone. And then this poor sibling is left out of a will. What happened there, Viv?
Yeah, so essentially there was a daughter of obviously two parents. Her father had been abusing her over the course of time, told her mother, then her mother decided to strip her out of the will. Subsequently, the children of this woman were also abused, so the grandchildren, and they were also subsequently removed from the will. An action was taken to the courts and awarded in her favour, and rightly so, because the grandmother's actions were abhorrent in the sense that they contributed to more psychological damage by her being completely removed from the will. So the courts awarded in her favour to be given access to $1 million.
I just find
will
that
inherit
I
it.
can't believe how the mother could condone this behaviour by her husband.
It's a
terrible.
pride. It obviously is a pride thing. I don't understand it, but yeah, it's. I'm
You're
just grateful
abusing
that
your own child.
Yeah,
I find that extraordinary.
and it's also perpetuating the abuse, which is the real concerning aspect.
She's condoning it.
Yeah, and the other aspect was the court acknowledged that throughout the course of her life there were many references made to the estate being split between the siblings. So
And
that
they were
intention
pretty
was there.
malicious too. They didn't want to give this
That's
particular
right. They
sibling
challenged
anything.
that. Yeah,
I
which
find
is-
that outrageous too.
Yeah, I agree.
So there are rights, aren't there?
Oh,
Everyone
yeah.
has
Oh, yeah.
rights.
Yeah.
When in doubt, ring 1300 injured and get your rights cleared up and clarified. Isn't that right, Viv?
Absolutely.
Anyway, Jess, thanks for coming on board.
Thanks for having me.
After the
Tony.
break, viewers, we've got Brendan Nottle from the Salvation Army. Stay tuned. Viewers, welcome back to the show. As I said before the break, we're very fortunate tonight to have Brendan Nottle from the Salvation Army. Now, he's a Major and Commanding Officer of the Salvation Army in Victoria. Good evening, Brendan. How are you?
Great to be here, Tony.
Good to have you.
Yeah.
Brendan, just in short, tell us what it is that you do.
Well, I'm based in the city with the Salvation Army, and our primary focus is to connect with people that are really vulnerable, that gravitate to the city.
Okay.
A lot of those people are homeless. We see a lot of people with serious mental health issues and addiction issues.
Okay.
And so our role is just to get in there wherever they are, connect with them, and then do whatever we have to do to get them off the streets and get them the support that they need.
Well, Viv, it's amazing. The Salvation Army looks after the homeless and people that are very, very vulnerable. Now, these are people with very little money. They're struggling for food and they've got nowhere to sleep. So the service they provide is absolutely invaluable to this state and across the country.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of misnomers about what the Salvation Army actually does day to day. Brendan, would you be able to tell us a little bit about what a day in the life of a Salvo actually looks like and how you do make such a huge difference to the community landscape and what other people can do to help support that resource?
Yeah, sure. I think chaos is a good word to describe it.
Okay. Much like most people's lives.
There's no 2 days that are the same. So we actually run a cafe for homeless people in Burke Street, and we see about 120, 130 for breakfast, 200 to 250 for lunch, and about 60 to 70 for dinner. And we've actually started opening our cafe overnight from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. And we're seeing anywhere between 80 and 100 people each night just sleeping on the floor because they've got nowhere else to go. And it's about not just providing meals, not just giving them a safe place to go, but we've actually got a lawyer that works full time with them, around issues such as fines and things like that, which often graduate into becoming warrants issued for their arrest.
What about, you said that they've got mental health issues,
Yep.
addiction issues. Have you got counsellors and people like that on your staff that can help these people try and get out of their rut? For want of a better word.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we've got a full-time psychologist, we've got an addictions worker, but we've also got housing workers as well. And I'm not sure who you barrack for.
I'm a Hawthorn supporter.
Well, how do you not know
Winners,
that, Brendan?
winners.
I mean, everybody who knows
Yeah,
Tony
No
knows
one
this.
told me that before I came in.
I'm a Hawthorn
Collingwood
supporter.
Football Club, let me repeat, Collingwood Football Club
Yes.
have got this great partnership with us where they actually provide 35 houses that they've rented off the private rental market, and
Yep.
we've actually got 120 people off the streets into those houses.
Okay.
So when people come into the cafe or our teams are out on the streets overnight, we're always looking, what do we have to do to help this person get off the streets? And we're engaging with the person saying, what do we need to do for you? So it might be mental health support, it could be a trip to the hospital. We had a man who had just terrible feet just recently, and we worked really hard to get him to the hospital, but sadly he passed away. So it was an awful experience.
What do you
but-
see? I'm just curious, Viv, and this is, what percentage of the people that you deal with, and no doubt you probably know them on a first name basis after a while,
Yeah.
what percentage of those you actually get back into fulfilling lives in society, get them a job? Because, I mean, one of the articles I was reading said that jobs are very scarce for these people. I mean, it's hard enough for someone that's got degrees and whatever else, but a lot of these, they've probably reached that point of they're destitute, lack of confidence and everything else.
Yeah.
What percentage actually get back into society?
It's a good question, Tony. I think a lot of people that we work with have got really complex issues, and they're not just homeless. They've got serious mental health issues. There's addiction issues, and often those issues are triggered by trauma that occurred way back in their childhood.
Yes.
And so that man that I was talking about before, that wouldn't wear shoes, had terrible feet, just to get some thongs on his feet, some sandals, was a great win. So there's no way he was going to be able to get back into the workforce. But just to get something safe on his feet was actually a really good outcome.
Yep.
We go right through to people that have just had something terrible happen in their lives out of the blue,
Yep.
and they need some really good support just to get them back on their feet. When that occurs, off they go. They're able to get some training and get some work.
Yeah.
Viv, you're an ambassador at the Bully Zero Foundation, which does a magnificent job looking after people that have been bullied at school and work and wherever else. Someone like you, who's successful, female, family, husband.
Oh no,
what-
the success
would you
isn't
be
defined by
would
having
you-
a husband,
would you be
Tony.
would you be interested in, the salvos?
Oh, of course,
know,
absolutely.
Dealing with these homeless people
Yeah,
and
and
people that are down on their luck.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the interesting things, just reading through some of the material, is that homelessness is so it's scary for people like ourselves who live so far removed from it, because you look at them and you say to yourself, that actually could be me.
Oh, yeah.
And, there is that misnomer of people who aren't educated, who have lived a downtrodden life, but often it's people with mental health issues who have actually had success but have fallen on hard times for reasons that date back to the trauma of, their history. And can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think that's really profound. And I recall meeting a homeless man many, many years ago when I was living in Dublin, and he was so highly revered as an author, very, very successful, but then lived on the streets because something in his brain had just shifted and he couldn't move himself beyond that. Do you see a little bit of that happening?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's two parts to it, Viv. I think one part is we see people that have been leading, like you described, just very average lives, and all of a sudden there's a catastrophic event that happens out of the blue and their life just falls apart. There was a man that we saw sleeping in the doorway of a very exclusive shoe shop in Collins Street here in Melbourne, and he always slept in his three-piece suit and collar and tie done up in the middle of the night. And
What was his occupation?
lecturer
Really?
at university,
Okay.
yeah. So his partner passed away tragically and suddenly, and his life just collapsed.
Okay.
And he didn't pay bills and lost his house, and life just completely fell apart very, very quickly, right through to the other side of it, where we often see young people in the suburbs, regional and rural areas that are victims of abuse, or they've witnessed or been caught up in domestic violence, and trauma occurs and nothing is done to address that trauma in that child. And if it's not addressed, it graduates very quickly into potentially a serious mental health issue. And then we find with a lot of people, if they don't have that mental health issue addressed, they start to self-medicate. So they start to use drugs or alcohol quite excessively. And then it's a very slippery slope to homelessness. And people tend to gravitate to the city because that's where the public hospitals are and large agencies are. So the issue that you're talking about around trauma is a really critical one, and often catastrophic, and it comes out of the blue.
Viewers, we have to go to a sponsors break. Stay tuned. After a break, we'll take up this discussion with Brendan Nottle and Vivian Ryan. Viewers, welcome back to the show. We're on this topic of homelessness and how do we deal with all the people that are sleeping rough and in our streets. Young people, older people, all sorts of people.
People
Viv.
from all sorts,
Yes.
all walks
all
of
walks
life.
of life.
So, Brendan, we're in crisis mode here in Victoria with homelessness. What do you attribute that to? I mean, there's been a huge increase over the last few years. Can you tell us a little bit about why you think that's happening?
Yeah, well, anecdotally, it's obvious that there's been a spike, but the City of Melbourne runs something called a street count, which they've been running since 2009. So in 2009, they counted 75 people sleeping rough on the streets of the city. In 2014, they counted 142 people sleeping rough on the streets of the city here in Melbourne. In June this year, 247 people sleeping rough. It's a 74% increase in the numbers.
They're alarming numbers, aren't they?
It's a crisis.
Yep,
There's no other way of describing it except calling it a crisis, because that's exactly what it is. And the reason for it, or there's a number of reasons, but we've had people sleeping for years around the fringe of the city, and there's been concerns about them leaving syringes in some cases and using garden beds as toilets. And so councils closed off certain areas around the city where people were sleeping rough. And people have moved into the spine of the city, so they're down along Swanson Street, Flinders Street, Elizabeth Street. But they also go there because they feel safer, because there has been some violence around the outskirts of the city directed towards homeless people. And there was that terrible case back in 2014 when Mouse, the 42-year-old homeless man, got murdered.
He got murdered. Just curiously, just on this issue, there's been a lot of stigma attached to the homelessness.
Yep.
You know, there's a lot of people out there that don't appreciate what they're going through, and they basically think they're bums, for want of a better word, that don't want to try and help themselves. What do you say to these people, Brendan?
Well, I think probably the first thing I'd say is come with me and I'll introduce you to the 9-year-old boy that I found sleeping behind St Paul's Cathedral. He'd run away from abuse at home. His dad kept beating him up. His dad beat up his mum. Mum had serious brain damage, and this little boy had nowhere to go, so he ran to the city. So is he a bum? Is he the sort of person that we say you should get on your feet and get a job? There was a woman that was raped by her father and actually fell pregnant to her father.
Can I take you back to the 9-year-old boy?
Yeah.
How are we going to get him back on track? He's going to need a foster home, isn't he? Realistically.
Yeah. Well, we've been working with him for 13 years. He's 22 now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How come he wasn't fostered out, Brendan?
Yeah, he was.
He was?
Yeah, and he kept running back into the city, and then finally Department of Human Services found a fantastic foster family for him.
Yes.
But it's just one of those unbelievable situations where if anything could possibly go wrong in this young boy's life, it went wrong. His foster father died.
No,
Then he gets to 18 and he's no longer in the care of the state. So he goes back to his mum. His mum died at age 47 a week before Christmas last year. So all of these things just continually go wrong in this kid's life. And he's using drugs and using them really excessively, but that's about self-medication. That's about trying to address this awful trauma that's gone on in this kid's life. And there's just something really, really good about this kid. You know, when you meet him,
What's he doing now? What's he doing with himself now?
He's back on the streets again.
Okay.
So we get him back in the streets and then he's off.
I guess the sad thing about all this, Viv, is that if he's doing drugs, I mean, he's got to fund it somehow, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And that's a bit of a worry.
Yeah.
I mean, where's he getting the money for that, Brendan?
There's begging and I'm sure there's other things going on as well.
And that's a concern. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's why we're trying to balance the ledger. How do we try and help him out? And at the same time, how do we prevent other things like the drug usage, thefts and whatever else goes on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there'd be a bit of that, I'd imagine.
And I think that's one of the key drivers for us in the work that we do is obviously it's about the person that's homeless. You know, they're a human being.
Yes.
At the end of the day, there's someone's son or daughter, there's someone's brother or sister, in some cases someone's mum or dad. You want to get them off the streets. You want to get them somewhere safe and get them all the supports that they need. But at the same time, you want to make sure that they're not having a negative impact upon the broader community, which is the point you're making.
Well, Daniel Andrews, Viv, apparently they approached him the other day and they said, what's the state government doing about the issue? And he said that he was apologetic about it, but really didn't offer any solution.
But didn't the government allocate 152 million towards public housing, and has that had any positive impact or have an indentation at all into this crisis?
So the public housing list in Victoria actually has 32,000 people on it. And our understanding is that in response to that public housing waiting list, there's been 80 new houses built in the last year. And this issue is so bad that it's got to be a federal issue. And yet we went through the longest federal election campaign in decades.
Known to man, yeah.
It never got a mention,
Yep,
not once. And yet it's top of mind for so many people. Wherever I go, people want to talk about this issue of rough sleepers.
The government giving money to the Salvation Army is one issue.
Yep.
What would you say to the public in terms of donating money? What else do you want? What else can you get to help the Salvation Army?
Yep. There's a couple of responses to that question. I think one is that if people are really serious about what's going on our streets, write to your federal member. Because what we'd love to see happen is a bipartisan approach around this issue where there's a strategy that's developed for the long term, not just for an electoral cycle, but for the long term. And regardless of the state of the economy, there's a commitment made that basic things will be put in place to address lack of affordable housing, that will address mental health issues, that will address trauma, as we mentioned before, and that will address addiction issues. So if you could write to your federal member, that would be a great start. I think the other thing too is what we're dealing with rough sleeping is a very, very complex issue, and it doesn't require simplistic responses. And sometimes we have people thinking they want to do the right thing and they'll drop food off to people sleeping rough, or they'll drop clothing off.
Blankets.
Generator, flat screen TV.
Well, where do they plug those in?
Into the generator, the petrol generator. Okay. You know, Blu-ray, DVD player. Like, so we go down and see people that are sleeping rough and saying, we've got somewhere for you to stay. And they say, why do we want to move? Like, we've got all this gear here. So if we're going to donate, we need to make sure it's very directed and targeted around giving homeless people what they need, which is what? A home.
But also funding would be good for you, wouldn't it?
Oh, critical.
Yeah, money. You want to get some money, and that might help you put people up.
Oh, absolutely. We stretch the limit in terms of staffing because the numbers have gone through the roof. So our lawyers run off his feet, the psychologists run off her feet, housing
maybe more professionals.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So where can people go to if they've watched this show and they said, I really want to help and I want to help productively? Where should people go?
We've got an app. So it's just called Salvo 614 app.
Salvo 614.
If you're into apps, that'd be
Brendan,
fantastic.
could we get one of your, I wouldn't say clients, but one of these people you're looking after to come on the show?
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe tell their story, their plight. The
Yeah.
22-year-old, if you can get him on.
Yeah, some of these people are actually incredibly inspiring because when you hear their stories, like that's what keeps me going.
Well, you're an incredible man, Brendan. You've had so many great achievements over the years, one of which is no less than being the Moomba Monarch back in, was it 2013?
I try to keep that a secret.
And he won the Melbourne of the year in 2013. Anyway, Viv, we're getting towards the end of the show. Anything else you'd like to add?
You know, I think for all of us, we need to be educated and not have these preconceived notions about that huge segregation between homelessness and what we do day to day. And I think, you know, that's got to be key too, to actually bridge that gap, bridge the divide, and so that there is more compassion and there is more willingness to really embrace and come together and try and eradicate homelessness.
Absolutely.
Make sure you look up the Salvation Army website and give as many donations as you can, money that is, not just goods, and help Brendan and his team support the people out there that are needy. Viewers, we've come to the end of the show. Brendan, thanks for coming on board. Viv, as usual.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for future episodes. Go to our past episodes on YouTube. Go to our social media platforms and always remember to stay safe.